moral question I want to ask you right now. Do you think subjective morality exists? So what I mean by that is morality as in the determination of what's good and bad, right and wrong. And subjective being under a person's own personal biases. So a person can decide what is wrong and right. Do you think that exists? Now, I'm assuming some of you might have said yes, might have said no. But if you said anything other than no, I'm afraid to say that you're completely freaking wrong. You're wrong, okay? Why do I say that you're utterly wrong in saying that subjective morality exists? Well, subjective morality, in my perspective, is plainly stupid. And I just got reminded of this idea talking with my pastor just yesterday. I'm recording on Monday, so yesterday was Sunday, and I was talking with him about this idea of subjective morality. Get away from the mosquito. And subjective morality doesn't exist because if subjective morality did exist, no one would be right and no one would be wrong. That's the thing. And how does that make sense? No one being right, no one being wrong. Because, well, to that person, they would be right and they would be wrong in certain ways, right? But that's only to that one person. Who cares in the midst of everyone else? Morality is something that identifies and is very universal. I don't think morality can be subjective and based on a single person. Because if morality were based on a single person, that'd be just straight up dictatorship. That'd be just a straight up. And as I say this, it might sound a little conflicting because I'm going to bring up the idea of God and how all that he is morally right. And that essentially means that we're basing morality based on this one thing. But it's because God isn't us. If we were based on a single person that doesn't know all that there is to know, and they don't have omniscience, that would be stupid. But God has the right and is worthy of determining the baseline standard of morality because he is omniscient, because he does know all that. He is worthy of such things. But objective morality is the only way it can exist and the only way that morality can exist, and subjective morality cannot exist. I wrote a paper on this in my philosophy class not too long ago, and it was a very interesting idea. Subjective morality cannot exist for the sole reason that no one can find something to be right or wrong, where morality just simply wouldn't exist then. It would just be an opinion. Morality would be boiled down and just brought down to the level of a simple opinion. And I don't think any of us want that for what morality is. Because then we wouldn't have a good judicial system, right? We'd then have just people getting away with murder because the judge kind of likes them, because the judge kind of sees them as pretty. They're handsome, you know? There's a reason why the lady of justice has a blindfold, so that they can't see and their own senses cannot blind them from making just and morally right decisions in a case. There's a reason why there's that blindfold over them. So you have to realize that having it being based on personal opinions and someone entirely is so utterly retarded, so utterly stupid. Mind my language, but it is so stupid. And you might be able to make the, argument of, what if just like a lot of people agree with that one opinion, right? Since a lot of people do agree on what's commonly right and wrong. A lot of people would agree that stealing is wrong, and a lot of people would agree that killing is wrong, right? Yeah, that works in the modern day, but what if we had a society where it was full of murderers and pedophiles? And they all said that what they're doing is fine. In that case, with that argument, it would be morally correct to, murder and, touch children. Which I think is utterly stupid if you're trying to argue that. Because just because a lot of people agree with it, doesn't mean it's correct. Doesn't mean it's right. and doesn't mean that you're making the right argument. It just means that every single person in there is morally incorrect. Morality stands on its own as its own thing. And whether people are moral or not are a different question, you know? You can have an incredibly moral society and also an incredibly immoral society. And it's something that can't really be explained by evolution either. Because morality is the grasp of what ought to be, what humans ought to do rather than what humans actually do. That's what evolution explains. Evolution explains what humans do. Morality explains what humans ought to do. So, you might say evolution is what caused morality, and it's a changing thing, not some universal metric. No. Because what people do might not always line up with morality. Coincidentally, it does line up because I think that's what God has done and pointed us towards. But if we evolved in a way to be completely against what was morally right, which was seen in previous points in the Bible, where God eventually had to, rinse them all and flood them, it's obvious that morality is a standalone principle and standalone guideline that doesn't cater to what humans think, to what we think. It's really something that just happens on its own, and it's its own little thing. It's in its own little world that we cannot control. And that's why I say evolution cannot explain things like morality. I really think God exists, right? Morality can be explained by evolution. Because as I said before, we might evolve to like each other and do things for each other and not kill each other for the sake of being more productive and having more offspring, sure. But what if, for some reason, we ended up just stealing more often, and that was the most competitive advantage that led to people making the most offspring and being the most well off? Well, then we would be in a case of people being morally wrong, but that was what led them to have the most children, and so evolution evolves them to be morally incorrect. Just because the large majority think a certain way doesn't mean that they're correct. If everyone thinks 2 plus 2 is 3.5, that doesn't mean they're all right. That just means they're all incorrect. So them all, they're going to seem right amongst each other, but it's just the blind leading the blind. It's not actually being led to the truth. People don't care about the truth. There's this one quote where I don't know who it is, but it's some NYU professor where he says, it's not that I don't believe there is a God, I don't want there to be. Because if there's no God, then they can do whatever they want. They don't have to follow some moral guideline. They don't have to follow something, but they can just do whatever they want. So my question to you is, do you want to pursue the truth, or do you just want to live the way you do? Because I think it's definitely going to be biased for me saying here, but it's better for you to suffer for the truth than to live a wrong and just incorrect existence. I'm trying to get out of here, but I'm just going to leave you with that question. I'm getting eaten alive by these mosquitoes out here, but hope y'all can just dwell on that question for a little bit. I hope y'all have a good day. Oh, yeah.